we just saw inflation go negative for the first time, I believe it was since, or the monthly rate of inflation turned negative, I think the first time since 2020. It decreased by 1% on month, and then the overall headline inflation number declined from 2.8 down to 2.4%. So again, that's above the Fed's 2% goal for inflation, and that's really where the central bank wants to see long-range inflation target at, but it does show that, and it was more than expected. I think investors kind of anticipated it would fall to 2.5%, but so it fell more than expected, turned negative on a month-to-month basis. So fantastic news.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by economics reporter Zach Halaschak. Zach, we've had a lot of uncertainty in the markets this week. We've had a lot of uncertainty with President Trump's tariffs. Where do things stand right now?
Yeah, it's been a roller coaster week for Wall Street, and investors are still very uncertain what's to come. So where we stand is Trump announced these sweeping tariffs, 10% across the board, and then much higher rates on certain countries based on a calculus of trade deficits, that sort of thing. And the markets kind of freaked out, reacted in a very negative fashion. Stocks plunged, and then for several days they plunged, and then I think you'd get a little news like, oh, he might be considering, loosening this provision, and they'd shoot back up 1,000 points, and then you'd hear that's not the case, and it'd shoot back down. So it's kind of amazing to see how much the market's just being driven by every little twist and turn of the tariff agenda. But then we got an actual rollback this past week on Wednesday, where he came out and said that the 90-day they'll be suspended for 90 days. So the bigger, higher country tariffs will be suspended for 90 days. But that's
the reciprocal tariffs.
Yeah, but the blanket 10% universal, if you will, tariffs is not being suspended. So tariffs are still very much on. And the market actually posted some major records. I think it was the highest growth since '08 in some indices. So it was just a very exuberant response from Wall Street saying, thank you, we really wanted this relief. And then today, the day after this, they're dumping again when the Trump administration kind of clarifies that the effective rate on China is 145%, not 125%. And so I think it's just, it's going to be a wild ride for Wall Street in the coming weeks. And I will say it's kind of unusual. He announced that they were putting the 90-day pause when his own U.S. trade Representative Jamieson Greer was testifying on Capitol Hill defending those tariffs, and you can kind of see in the hearing where he sort of found out, it appears, during the hearing as he was testifying. So it's just been a very wild week when it comes to tariffs.
And the president said, he thought that the markets and people were getting the yippies, so it was time maybe to dial it back for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a measure of, if the market starts dumping too much, you could be getting into this could cause a recession territory. And so I think it's, I talked to a lot of Senate Republicans and House Republicans. When you ask them about tariffs, they're very much in wait-and-see mode. You could kind of tell a lot of them, are not big fans of tariffs, but they're willing to trust the process. And I think that, to some degree, the Trump administration is also going to have to kind of do this wait-and-see thing because they're not fully sure how all this is going to end up shaking out. So it's kind of a, build the plane as you fly type deal.
But we have gotten some good news on inflation.
Yes, we have. And it's that's very welcome, because if we start getting bad news on inflation coupled with the tariffs, I think the markets would really be freaking out. But we just saw inflation go negative for the first time, I believe it was since, or the monthly rate of inflation turned negative, I think the first time since 2020. It decreased by 1% on month, and then the overall headline inflation number declined from 2.8 down to 2.4%. So again, that's above the Fed's 2% goal for inflation, and that's really where the central bank wants to see long-range inflation target at, but it does show that, and it was more than expected. I think investors kind of anticipated it would fall to 2.5%, but so it fell more than expected, turned negative on a month-to-month basis. So fantastic news. Good to see. Big part of that's lowered energy prices are kind of driving that, among other things. Obviously, the president and the Fed would like to see more progress on that. But obviously the elephant in the room here is tariffs. You've heard Fed Chairman Jerome Powell say that it kind of changes the inflation outlook for the Fed. They kind of are anticipating that inflation will be on balance higher at the end of the year than it was projected to be back before Trump came into office, just because, these things all affect the broader economy when you apply such massive sweeping tariffs to the global, economy and whatnot. So yeah, it's good news. I think that the markets, investors, Fed watchers really want to see what happens next when it comes to tariffs and stuff and inflation, and really see how this is all going to kind of tie together.
So there's been a strange bedfellows political coalition behind a child tax credit. Talk a little bit about what they're working to see here.
Yeah, so I mean, the biggest legislative issue this year, and probably of the entire Trump administration, this second Trump administration, presumably, is this massive fiscal package that Republicans are trying to pass through reconciliation,
Right.
which is the budget process that basically allows them to give an up-down on a tax package without having the filibuster or the supermajority, I mean, in the Senate, the 60 vote threshold.
Which means they can pass things through the Senate without any Democratic votes.
100%, yeah. They just need all Republicans on board. So as they're crafting this tax legislation, you're going to see some Republicans hold out on their votes for different priorities, and it's going to be a whole, hodgepodge of different things happening in the next year. But one of those that's more popular, growing more popular among Republicans, is increasing the size of the child tax credit. It was doubled in 2017 as part of the Trump tax cuts, the first go around, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And now you see some lawmakers on the right that are calling for it to be expanded even more. But it's notable in part because, maybe a decade ago, you weren't hearing a lot of Republicans talking about how we need to give, more federal spending to the child tax credit. That was always a Democratic priority. They liked the idea of a child tax credit. Democrats have boosted it temporarily in 2021 when they held both chambers in the presidency. So you usually see Democrats pushing this, but now you're seeing both kind of pushing for this. Obviously, the Democrats have different priorities when it comes to it, but we had this week, Third Way came out. It's a center-left group, I believe founded by kind of like the Clinton people in the Clinton
1990s
administration.
era, right.
And they wrote a letter to Republicans in the House and Senate, basically, or an analysis in a letter, but basically breaking down the different menu of options for the child tax credit. Like, at the very minimum, they want it to be extended in its current form, which doubled it in 2017. But they also recommended indexing to inflation because we've just had the worst bout of inflation in generations.
Right.
So, the $2,000 tax credit, as it was passed in 2017, is now, if we're accounting for inflation, it would be like $2,500, something like that. So that's one option. I know some Republicans in the House have told me they've expressed optimism about and maybe indexing it to inflation. And it included a number of other fixes, like a baby bonus. So like the first year of a child's life, it would be a bigger child tax credit, that sort of thing. And you see Republicans in part really supporting this because they're kind of digging in on this like populist child, family development type thing, building out families, families of the building block of society. So you see all these initiatives, and people like J.D. Vance have championed causes behind a bigger child tax credit and just like more support for the families as a whole. So I think that it's going to be an interesting thing to see play out this coming year and see kind of where that ends up in negotiations. Because again, you got to remember that there's always the issue of the price tag when it comes to all these tax provisions. It's going to be a give and take.
Thank you, Zach.
Yep.
You can read Zach and the rest of our policy team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.